Banks Stewart. Well, that's better. Do you get sick and tired of people just thinking that all you ever did was Bergerac and nothing else?
No. I think some subsequent things like Darling Buds May and did balance things up a bit. Two things about those titles. The guy who designed those titles did the EastEnders titles. You can see a little bit of the... But we just thought that we better tell people where Jersey was. So that was the idea. And also the music was written by George Fenton, who wrote the music for several of my shows, including Shoestring, and subsequently went on to do a lot of big movies, Cry Freedom, Gandhi, Dog Day Afternoons, all those things. And George never went to Jersey. His wife had a previous marriage, and her husband was killed in an air crash. He played for a rugby team, and a plane crashed just outside Paris, and he was killed. And so when I asked George to go to Jersey and get a feeling for the island to get into his music, he was about to board the plane when his wife came running across the tarmac and screaming and said, please don't go, please don't go. So he never went. And I said, just try and get a feeling of the island, seagulls, bit of France and all that. And he did it wonderfully well. The
most strange thing about the Channel Islands, we go a lot on holiday, is that actually they're not very French. You have all the sort of French names. They're actually more British than probably
This is perfectly true. And in fact, I actually tried to go back to being... You see, they were actually French. Their patois was Norman French. And until the British pinched them somewhere around about 1850, they were actually French. I think it might have been a bit earlier than that.
Yes.
But anyhow, I tried to sort of reintroduce a feeling of France. It was pretty difficult because the cafes were really greasy spoons, and with Daleks outside and that sort of stuff. But I sort of insisted on that. So whenever anybody said, we've got to get over quickly to somewhere, I would say, make it a French street name, And so people would sort of say, get over to La Motte Street, What? But then I persuaded lots of cafes and stuff to put tables outside and umbrellas. And we went on like that through the first two series. And now, they do all that. Mm. But we cheated mercifully, mercilessly, rather.
I've often wondered, we have you here today thanks to Jimmy Kefton Jones,
yes,
who tracked you down for us. And you said to me on the phone that, of course, his wife, Maggie,
yes,
was your production manager and set up. How much of it was actually shot in Jersey and how much was shot in Britain?
Well, the first series, actually, the Royal Barge set was recreated on the studio floor in Ealing. We used the barge window, which is, of course, it's a restaurant and bar called the Old Courthouse in St. Aubin in Jersey. We recreated that window, and then we built our own sort of restaurant and bar inside, the police office, all that. The interiors were done mainly, the main interiors were done in the studio at Ealing. But after the first series, we realised that we were paying an awful lot more money to run costumes, transport, sets, everything over back and forwards. So we took over an old cinema called the Forum, which is now demolished. It's now an office block. But in the days when the Germans were there, they showed Victory in the West, spelt with a K, and Laurel and Hardy. And the German generals would sit with their boots up on the seats watching Laurel and Hardy in the Forum cinema. So anyway, we made that into our studio. It was a cinema that was going to be demolished, and the then owner, let us use it. And we created probably the first studio outside of the BBC system, and saved a lot of money with it.
Why Jersey? I'm intrigued. Why not Guernsey? And why the Channel Islands? Because I've noticed you do quite like the Channel Islands, don't you?
I like them.
Your other work, owner-occupied.
Well, that's actually part of the reason. I would say straight away, of course, that the idea of making a series in the Isle of Man is so terrible. I mean, it really is the most. I did do the first episode of Lovejoy. It wasn't shown first, but we made it in the Isle of Man, and quite honestly, it rained all the time. Douglas was the most depressing place. I mean, I used to say to people, if you're going to kill yourself, if you're going to commit suicide, go to the Isle of Man, stay in Douglas, and you'll do it. But in fact, a friend of mine has just made a very big film called Stormbreaker, which he shot mainly in the Isle of Man. And Jeff Sachs, who's worked with me before, and he said, never again. No, Jazzy seemed to me to have everything that we needed. The reason, actually, that it came about was I wrote a comedy some years earlier called Owner Occupied, which I see you're showing. Yep. It was just an idea that I had about a very English lady running a hotel in Jersey who suddenly finds a German officer billeted on her. And it was to be a comedy series about this German officer who was actually an Anglophile. He loved cricket and Vaughan Williams, hated Wagner, all that. So Hannah Gordon played the woman, Robert Hardy played the German officer, and it was great fun to write it. But when we made it, everybody loved it, and then suddenly we weren't going to do it because the program controller, Jeremy Isaacs, who's a very nice guy, good friend of mine really, said, I can't do it, Bob. I can't do a comedy series about the German occupation. I'm Jewish, I can't do it. I said, Jeremy, you're also a Glaswegian, you bastard. And we had a big fight behind doors. The upshot was we didn't do it. So several years later, after Shoestring, the BBC asked me, which is something that no producer today would ever get the offer, what would you like to do next? I mean, can you imagine? So I said, well, I've always felt somehow that Jersey, because I went there to get the feeling for Owner Occupied. I said, nobody's ever used it. And here we've got our other than the Isle of Man, which, we've said enough about that. I said, really, here's a place, tax avoiders, not evaders. Evaders are, we're always told, don't ever call them evaders. Tax avoiders, ranging from Jack Higgins, the author, to Billy Butland, to all sorts of people, the boxer, Walker, I mean, they're all living in this island, jockeys, everybody. Well, what was his name?
Sorry, I've got me still.
Yeah. Anyway, so I said, there's got to be a way of using that island. So the then controller of drama at BBC said, go tomorrow. So I did, and I walked around, and I thought, I didn't want to do Shoestring again, I didn't want to do that style. And I thought, I'll do this kind of straight thing, but it'll be all set in Jersey, and it'll be one guy, and that's how it came to be Bergerac. Now, I looked in a phone book because I thought, what's his name going to be? And all I could see were old Jersey family names, scrolls of them, you see. And I thought, I can't use one of those names. And then I saw one name, Bergerac. I thought, I can use that. So long afterwards, people used to say, yeah, you drink Bergerac wine, No, I said, that's not the reason. So again, it was a French thing. But the funny thing was that actors turned up, sent by their agents, with funny noses and things like that, saying, I've come for a part in Cyrano de Bergerac. No, so I say, terribly sorry, this is called Bergerac. We did get that confusion quite often.
You were quite unique in BBC terms because you were allowed, certainly in later years, with Shoestring and Bergerac and Lovejoy and Moon and Son, to shoot entirely on film.
Yes, that's true. That was a big boon. It also meant that I had some really superb directors. I mean, one of them, Martin Campbell, who worked on both Shoestring and Bergerac, is one of your big Hollywood directors. His new Bond, Casino Royale, comes out soon. He did Goldeneye. Mask of Zorro, all that. Well, Martin, great friend of mine, cut his teeth, on Bergerac, which is great. And because it was all film, and there were lots of directors who wanted, all directors in television want to be big film directors. They're quite right, So I was able to get some very good directors.
You also got some very unusual running times. It's a strange thing to say, but a lot of yours seem to run over what the sort of standard 50 minutes that the BBC loves so much. You have to fight to get the extra 10 minutes.
That's perfectly true. Well, the standard used to be something like 56, because BBC didn't have any commercials, therefore it was like 56, 57 minutes. You could sometimes just creep over and just tell presentation, sorry, but we're not going to cut any more. But then, of course, came the point where it was down to, 53 and then 52, and now what happens is when they sell the program, or when they've sold my programs abroad, they're all chopped down to like 48 minutes, and sometimes I find it's bewildering, because if I catch an old program, on digital, and I just maybe happen to watch it, and I think, what's that? Where's that scene? What's the explanation for this? But so anyway, we did overrun quite a lot, actually.
Let's take you back to your very, very beginnings. You were Robert Stewart originally.
I was, yes, yeah. Well,
where did the Banks come from?
Well, there was a point in time, I think it was somewhere about the early 60s, when there were so many Stewarts around in television. Don't ask me why. They didn't all wear kilts either. And there was a Rob Stewart, who was a pianist and composer. There was a Robert Stewart, STUA, who wrote for This Is Your Life and others. There was a William G. Stewart, who's still around, who's become a millionaire, unlike me. There was another John D. Stewart. Anyway, my then agent, Beryl Virtue, who went on to become big producer of, you're showing Men Behaving Badly, she did that. She was my agent. She said, Bob, it's terrible, there's Bruce Stewart. And I said, oh, I know Bruce very well. She said, yeah, but the trouble is, you're getting confused with everybody. And have you got a middle name? And I said, yeah, Banks. She said, Robert Banks Stewart. I said, oh, come on, Beryl, that's a bit heavy. She looked at me and she said, Robert Louis Stevenson? And I didn't have any... I had no answer to that. So that's how I changed. But it's a bit weird. I now, of course, deny any responsibility for any Robert Stewarts that I don't like.
Of course.
I mean, obviously it must have been the other guy.
Well, let's take you back a bit. Have a look at a clip from a very early piece of your work. Yeah. See if you know what the show is.
God.
I'm going to say.
Undermined. Yes.
I've been for the store since
Rosemary Nichols.
Are you going to sell up?
This furniture's mostly junk. He didn't earn very much.
No. Wilson.
The policemen are like bank clerks. They aren't encouraged to have high purchase.
Quite unusual for
part
ABC
of
to do a
getting
sort of
10-part.
I thought almost a bit like the Invaders, really, wasn't it?
It was.
You need to give up your
yes.
job.
I couldn't have gone on looking after those children.
It was actually my first video television show. I had worked on, as a writer, I'd worked on films. I also worked as a writer and story editor on Rank's first television film series, Interpol Calling, which was a half-hour series, It was great fun to work on that. Danger Man I'd worked on with Patrick McGowan. But now I went to Teddington and we did Undermined, and it was a sort of serial. There was a sort of a linking thing. I mean, today I probably would find terrible fault with a lot of it, like I do with everything, really. But it was very exciting for me because I didn't write the whole series. We had other writers. We had some marvellous writers. I mean, the Irish playwright Hugh Leonard wrote an episode, and
You sort of plot, what I can say, I mean, where you're credited as sort of originating it. So
Yeah,
were you
yeah.
sort of given the job of trying to flesh out what would happen in each episode?
yes, and I was also the story editor, so called. Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, I've been lucky in the sense that I've worked both as a story editor and producer, as well as being a writer. But I am predominantly a writer.
Mm.
I mean, I started writing in Scotland before I came. I was a journalist, and I wrote 2 stage plays in Scotland, and then I wasn't sure, if that was the way to go. But eventually, I graduated from being a journalist in Edinburgh, and then I worked for Illustrated magazine, which was a terrific experience. I had 3 years traveling around the world writing magazine articles until the picture magazines like Picture Post and Illustrated folded. So that was when I joined ranks. But I suppose I must have used a lot of experience. But as I say, I'm predominantly a writer.
Mm. Then we've got another show we're going to show you wrote for as well here. This to me is a sort of highbrow end of ABC, I think this is actually.
What's that? Well. Great guy.
So I suppose now they'd digitally airbrush out his cigarette, wouldn't they?
Today it certainly
He'd
would.
be
Yeah.
holding a pencil or something.
They sure
Steady
would. No, the Human Jungle was a great experience. Herbert Lom was absolutely terrific, wonderful actor, wonderful to work with as well. No side to him, no bombast, just got on and did it. And he's still working. I was talking to somebody last week. Oh yeah, said Herbert's doing a film in Prague, and he's about 87 years old. He's a terrific guy. The Human Jungle was a typical experience of writers at that time. Another writer, John Cruise, and I were invited to create the series. There was a producer, an American, who came up with one thing: the Human Jungle. Yes, the Human Jungle, boys. Oh, I see. Psychiatrist. So we had these things, Human Jungle, psychiatrist. Yes. So John Cruise and I, he lives in Spain now, John, very good writer, wrote movies. He and I went away and we created the Human Jungle. It was a bit like the old joke of the tramp who comes to the door with a button and says, "Madam, would you sew a shirt on?" And we never got paid for creating it. We were rewarded with work. That was our reward. I remember.
How long would it take you to write a script? Sort of interest.
It varied. I mean, if you really seized, you could probably bash the first draft out in about a week to 10 days. But normally you would allow yourself about 2 to 3 weeks, if you were doing a good job. And also there were the revisions and so on. But no, following up on that thing, I remember at one time I was going on holiday with my family to Italy, and we were just about to go, got the kids in the car and everything. Phone rang, and it was the producer, the guy who ran not the producer, the film company, independent artist, and a guy called Julian Wintle. He said, "Oh, Bob," he said, "is that true? Are you going on holiday?" I said, "Yeah, I'm just leaving, Julian." He said, "But you're under contract to us." I said, "Well, I'm under contract to write scripts, Julian. I can write them where I want.
Mm.
So that was, but it was a good experience to work on it. And in fact, it was one of the few British series, nicely done on film, by the way, good directors. One of the very few that got a network on NBC, not at a peak time, but it got a network in America. Very, very few. The Avengers did eventually, but not many.
Mm.
Good one to.
Talking about that Uncle Mark, shall we have a look at another little bit?
Yeah.
The interesting story attached to it.
Mrs. Beale. Mrs. Beale. Come along. No time for nodding off.
Yes, it is. Did it have to be the middle of the night, Steve?
Night? It's morning. Bright new morning. Best part of the day. Dew is pearly. The morning chorus is in full throat.
And everyone in their right minds are still asleep. Where are we, anyway?
The country residence of Sir Clive Todd.
Todd.
How do you write an episode for one actress who then becomes another actress?
Oh, well, that was an accident. The very first. Well, let's divide it. Originally, ABC Television made The Avengers as a video series for about 3-4 years, and then they decided that they would make a film series based at Elstree. And this, what happened was that the first episode, written by Brian Clemens, who became eventually the producer, a very talented writer, they cast a lady whose name I'm not going to mention. You probably know.
Yeah, Liz Shepherd.
Okay. And it didn't work. For various reasons, they decided she wasn't right. I had by then written another episode. And what they decided when they cast Dana Rigg, they thought, well, we won't have her reshoot the original scenes in the original first episode. We'll just push her straight into a whole episode. And that was one of mine called The Masterminds. I don't think that's a clip from The Masterminds. I
think it is.
It is.
Yeah.
Is it? Oh, right.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
well. Yeah.
Mark's nodding.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, The Masterminds was where Steed and Emma Peel went. It was like Mensa. I called it Ransack, and they went for a jolly weekend, testing their IQ. He had the answers written on his cuff. She was a member, of course. Good fun. So Diana actually made her debut in that episode, although it wasn't shown first.
Did you have to rewrite it? I mean,
No.
presumably the character of the Liz Shepherd character must have been different to the character of Dinah Rigg.
Yes, it was never, no, the Emma Peel, that may have been the reason why Elizabeth Shepherd wasn't right. I mean, I have to give Brian the credit for writing the original first episode, and he probably wrote it with the kind of Emma Peel in mind that he wanted and didn't get it. Not the girl's fault. I mean, she was just, if you make a mistake in casting, it's not necessarily the artist.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much rewriting. I mean, there was always a bit of changing of lines, and so, but gosh, it was a good series. I mean, we don't do this anymore. We don't make this kind of style. I mean, what I have to say is that I'm so bored with these guys who put their hands up, call themselves, big-time executives. There's a guy last week laying claim, a guy at Granada, laying claim to being, done this, done that, When you looked at what he'd done, it was crap. And he's presented as a possible new controller and all this. And the problem is, and one of the things that he did was the thing called The Deal. So it was made a great thing. Okay, Stephen Frears did that, did it beautifully well. But okay, that was just a piece of drama based on an actual.
But I think, but generally speaking, I mean, it's about life. I mean, generally speaking, in teaching, who are my background is,
Yes.
the people who get promoted are either normally absolutely dreadful,
Yes,
or
yes.
occasionally absolutely brilliant, and generally it's the people who are rubbish who get promoted to the very, very top.
I think this
And
is perfectly.
I look at the people who are sort of left working in television,
Yeah.
like yourself. You worked for
Yeah.
many years as a producer,
Sure.
writer. I mean, they probably wanted to keep you there because you were very successful at what you did.
Yeah, my real complaint though is not to do with that. It's to do with the fact that too much of television drama now is all bottled up. It's all down to the way it's shot, shadows and people running down corridors, and everything's internal. You know, if it's an office block, they maybe get onto the roof, but that's about as far as it will go. And we get a lot of issue drama, you know, where it's to do with drugs, abortion, you name it. It's heavy stuff. You never get the Avengers today, you know, and a whole lot of other series. I mean, the Darling Buzz of May, for example, would never be made today if Yorkshire hadn't had the right to say we are going to make 6 hours of H.E. Bates Larkin stories. If they hadn't had the right to do it, and in fact, when it was made, Greg Dyke hated it, and so did the current head of ITV drama. So you can draw your own conclusion from that. And they wanted to put London Weekend's own Forever Green into the Sunday night slot, and Forever Green was going to be the Sunday night, and Darling Buzz is going to be the Friday night. So there was a big row ensued, and in the end, the controller at Yorkshire, John Fairley, he won, and Greg Dyke gave way, and Darling Buzz went out on a Sunday night. And, you know, as they say, the rest is history. I mean, got 18 million viewers, the biggest rating for any new drama series still. But the point is that I can't see... You see, Doc Martin did terribly well because it had a sort of feeling of a life of its own in Port Isaac, in Cornwall. And it had a sort of style. I just don't know why nobody goes for a bit of style, a bit of fun, a bit of, you know.
I think the problem is the fact that, I mean, it's a bit like what the Darling Buzz of May had.
Yeah.
The rest of the 90s and the noughties, as I call them, then had a whole load of successors all trying to copy that. Sometimes you need a drama to come along that is different.
Yes, that's perfectly true.
And is unique.
Yeah.
You know.
I do agree. I mean, I'm not rubbishing all recent drama or contemporary drama, and maybe, who knows, the September season just about to begin may produce some very nice things. It's just that by and large, series like the Avengers, like the Darling Buzz, like, you know, what was the one, you know, well, there was a Chinese detective, there was well, ITV had its share of terrific series as well. I mean, I don't think you'd even get Inspector Morse today.
No, Ted Charles was saying that to us.
Did he? Well, I'm not
A couple
surprised.
of events ago, he didn't think they'd make Inspector
No,
Morse
they would say,
anymore.
"Oh, you know, can't do that." Set in Oxford and all about a
mean,
detective in Oxford.
Far too much.
I mean, I'm ranting on a bit, but
I mean, our next clip comes from a show that was remade in the 90s, and I don't think was anywhere near as good as it was in the 70s. So
Right.
let's have a look at the clip, and perhaps you can see what you think about whether you... See something else you wanted to see. You seem to work on a lot of shows set in very picturesque locations.
Yes, I like going on location. Yeah, yes, France, Australia, Holland. I mean, how lucky can you get? I worked as a story editor on Van der Valk. I wasn't the creator of it or the producer, but I loved doing it. I was married to a Dutch girl, and because of that, I had quite a sort of input. This incidentally was the second series, which the first one didn't seem to work. It's just something to do with the choice of story, and I was given the job to do the new series, and we pushed it to the number one, and it was great, you know. But I was lucky because with my knowledge of Holland, I was able to go regularly with directors to kind of recce the next episode. I also took writers over there, and somehow we used to do it in this way. We'd film for about 3 or 4 days over a long weekend, and then we'd do the rest in the studio and pick up shots. I mean, I can remember doing a whole scene on a terrace overlooking the Thames at Hampton Court with a willow tree running into the water and a Dutch phone booth there and a Dutch policeman coming, you know. And I did a flower shop, Bloemen and Planten, you know, which was in East Molesey. But we had the rack outside with all the bicycles, and we heard the sound of the Wester Kirk, and it was completely convincing. But the thing was that the designers did a wonderful job. They used to redesign the interiors with all the stoves, the tiles, and everything. It was terrifically successful. The music was lovely, written by an American who lived in Amsterdam, and he wrote it for one of what we call a stock library. And I one day was with the original producer, Michael Chapman, and we were in the music department at Thames. And the girl, I can't remember her name now, who ran it, said, "I think you ought to listen to this little bit." That was that. Everybody was whistling it, and it was a great success. They pushed it into the ground 2 or 3 years later. They made it as a film series, all film series, and it became sort of Z cars in Amsterdam, you know. It was kind of da 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 da, you know, and it took away the whole ambience, you know, which Barry Foster, who sadly died 2 or 3 years ago, he in the first series, you see, he didn't come over quite. I mean, he was always known as a little Rottweiler as a character, but I think he was terribly good, and it was a lovely. And on top of that, if I say I'm lucky, I went over almost every other weekend. I stayed in a suite in a wonderful hotel on the Princeton Gracht, and I used to think, God, I'm getting paid for this. Anyway, good.
Well, you're convincing my wife here to take me to Amsterdam on holiday.
Oh, it's a lovely city.
She's been angling for a great excuse for a long time now to go to Amsterdam.
It's a lovely city. You know. All these things that you want to experience that I did, every new cast who came over would say, "Where's the red light district? Where's the red light district?" You know. And Bob Love, who was the producer, and he couldn't be bothered, and he was gay as well. There's nothing wrong with that, but he wasn't interested, right? So Muggins was the guy. I was the guide for every new cast, right? So we always ended up, you know, going on you know, and we went to live shows, known as real live hard focky. And I'm the only person who once fell asleep because it was about the 10th time I'd been there.
And does your wife know this?
My wife at the time did, actually, yes.
Right.
She knew that it was in the line of duty.
Oh, right. Of course.
So
I must try this, actually, darling. I've never tried this before. Yes. Having to go to places in Soho because film company is based there, you know.
I think
I must try this
at
excuse.
one point, I was with a very good writer called Peter Yeldham, who lives in Australia now, wrote a lot of films. And Peter came over, and we went to see one of these shows, and you know, I can remember thinking, what am I doing here? You know, it was kind of a demi-monde. And there was a row. There was a couple who were having it away on a podium, surrounded by armchairs, right? Guys with cameras, a bit like some people. And, you see, Japanese guy. And suddenly a guy, I don't know why he spoke in English because he was German, stood up and he said, "Why don't you get on with it?" to the guy thing. And the Dutchman got up, and he was huge, and he was as limp as a rag, so he made it worse, and he said, "You shut your fucking mouth," And the next thing was, this guy, the German came through, the naked Dutchman, was fighting naked, chairs were going over. The whole scene was absurd, really. I used it.
Yes, I would. I would say, put it in a script.
I used it in Shoestring. Shoestring went to a strip club in an episode called, I can't remember the name now, but it was a good show. Martin Campbell directed it. And Shoestring went to this strip club, and there was a huge row, and all the Roman statues and plaster Roman statues got knocked down and everything. So, everything...
Isn't that true that that's what writers do? Writers remember incidents from real life, and they bring them back into scripts later.
The thing is, you don't consciously... I mean, there are people who write things in notebooks. I've never done that. And you don't consciously say, "Oh, I'll use that," and, But sometimes, you suddenly think, "Oh, wait a minute."
Mm. Now, one thing I did notice, that obviously Charles Endell was shot in Scotland, but a lot of your work actually doesn't have a very Scottish theme, but our next clip does have a Scottish theme. Did it help you to sort of, I suppose, put more flavour onto it? There we go. This is a rare chance for me to show a show that Mark loves very dearly as well. So.
We need your body print.
It's very Scottish, as you can see.
Well, there were kilts in it, yes,
Yeah, there were.
It was shot in Surrey at Frensham Pond.
Selected humans provide us with body prints.
I had a few girlfriends looking like
device
that.
doubtless beyond your understanding.
Are they dead?
Is it meant to be a sort of stereotypical Scotland? But that never
No,
really existed?
I mean, what happened basically is that I have 3 sons who were just little boys at that time, and they kept saying, "Go on, write a Doctor Who." And I knew the producer, Philip Hitchcock, was a great friend of mine. So I ended up writing the first Doctor Who of my career, and I thought, I can't write this sort of mad sci-fi, Robert Holmes, who was the script editor, a wonderful creative guy, who was really brilliant, he helped me. And I said, "Look, can I just set it somewhere where I'd feel, So I dreamt up this story about the Loch Ness Monster escaping through a sump from Loch Ness and swimming down the North Sea. I mean, call it rubbish if you like. It was great fun to do. And subsequently, I did another one called The Seeds of Doom. And again, I set that in a sort of a millionaire's personal Kew Gardens where he reared this pod. Again, I couldn't do that outer space thing. It's not me. But they were great fun to do. My God, they've lasted.
Were you? I suppose for first Doctor Who fans amongst us, it was one of the last appearances of sort of unit people.
It was actually.
Were you
yes.
given sort of a brief that you had to include certain characters?
No. It was quite.
So that was your conscious choice then.
Talking about the fact that Doctor Who goes on and on. I mean, the new ones are brilliant. I mean, they're of a different era, but they're beautifully done. But all these, they've been selling around the world for years. I mean, I don't get much now, but every now and then there's a few hundred comes along. Now, I remember I was writing a movie in Hollywood, and this American lawyer, I went to a dinner party. This American lawyer said to me, "You Robert Banks Stewart?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You write at Doctor Who?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Geez, I loved her." The next thing was, the guy told me chapter and verse, just about every scene. He said, "Oh, I loved it when, great, when the Doctor threw that, And I thought, I'm dreaming. I'm sitting here in Hollywood, and all the guy's talking about is Doctor Who. But it was fun to do, yeah.
It has that kind of effect on you, though. But I suppose that, I don't know whether, but that was almost one of the first times you worked at the BBC, though, because up to then you had been mainly an ITV person, hadn't you?
Yes, I had written a bit, because I actually wrote the first scripts for Dr. Finlay's Casebook. We're going back to 1962, and the two series in that year were Dr. Finlay's Casebook and Z-Cars. And I was living in Spain, actually, and I wrote the first two or three, and then the script editor, Vincent Tilsley, who was the son of a very well-known novelist at that time, Frank Tilsley, he became story editor, and he wrote the new first episode. But I can remember going to the Riverside Studios where they were recording my first one, and I thought, oh, God, this is terrible. There was Barbara Mullen, who's Irish, saying, "Come along, doctor, I'll come on your tea." And then there was Andrew Cruikshank, could never remember his lines, so he fiddled about with his glasses while I remembered, "Dr. Finlay, I feel that you," and then there was Bill Simpson, who'd been a newscaster. And I can remember thinking, oh, God, it's a disaster. How wrong can you be?
And of course, it was never made by BBC Scotland. That's what I find amazing.
It wasn't, no. And actually, I suffered ever after for that. Writers in Scotland used to treat me, how can I put it? I think they're like a Polish plumber. I would get this thing in Glasgow when I was doing Southern's Law, writing Southern's Law, you taking the work away from us. Oh, sorry, but I do come from Edinburgh, Yeah, you don't speak like it anymore. Which is true. There was a neighbour of my parents were alive then in Edinburgh, and I remember getting out of the car, and I was getting some stuff out of the boot, and a neighbour, Mrs. Whitehouse, I always remember her name, not Mary Whitehouse, but Mrs. Whitehouse, and she came to see me, and she said, "Bobby!" "Oh, hello, Mrs. Whitehouse. What have they done to you?" I thought, oh gosh, yeah. I don't know. Anyway, that's my Scottish accent is curious in a way that I was also a soccer commentator in Scotland. I did 2 years of radio, and so every Saturday afternoon I did the commentaries, from Rangers, Celtic, all that. And when I first came to London to be a magazine writer, when I was free, I used to do these short. I used to drive like hell from, Stamford Bridge or White Hart Lane, get to Langham Place, rush up the stairs, get in the studio, and Eamon Andrews would be sitting there with the cans, And then one day he said, 45,000 people watched the match at Stamford Bridge today, among them Bob Stewart, that was me then, and I wasn't there, I was at White Hart Lane, and I remember saying, "Well, Eamon, I was at White Hart Lane, actually, and I'm glad I was, because what a match it was." But Eamon, who I knew quite well, he and I used to discuss the fact that you couldn't keep the rough edges of your native voice. I mean, take Sutherland's Law, half of it would go over people's heads, really. You couldn't keep that sort of rough edge.
Yeah.
You had to be slightly, in Eamon's case, slightly American. And he used to say to me, I'm really just a boxing commentator, especially when his show was doing badly, his chat show. But no, the accent is a wee bit. When I'm in England or anywhere like that, people have no doubt whatever I'm Scottish. When I'm in Scotland, people say, rather like Mrs. Whitehouse, "What have they done to you?"
I mean, is that a consideration when you pick a leading person? I'm intrigued to know how much of it was your choice, say, to pick Trevor Eve for Shoestring, or John Nettles for Bergerac, or Ian McShane for Lovejoy.
Yeah, well, or Catherine Zeta-Jones.
Yeah,
don't leave her out. That's the fairy story of all time, really. Well, no, in the case
tell us
of
the fairy story afterwards, isn't it?
Yeah.
'Cause we like fairy stories.
Well,
Okay, so.
what happened with Trevor Eve was that when I, created Shoestring, which I did incidentally with a friend of mine, Richard Harris, very distinguished writer, Outside Edge, plays and all that. Dick came in and worked with me, and then in the end he was too tired and he didn't want to do it. But anyway, we cast around for an actor. We had lots of people in mind, James Bolam, but he was doing When the Boat Comes In, and he wanted to do another series of When the Boat Comes In and then do Shoestring. And Graham MacDonald, who was the head of series, said, no, we can't wait, we want to do it. Bill Cotton wanted Michael Crawford. I mean, Michael's wonderful in what he's done and would still do, on stage years afterwards. But to have him play in a drama series, and I just said, look, I'm sorry, Bill, I'll lie down in front of your car if you, They gave him the scripts, and because Michael Crawford was in a bit of a trough at that time, and he was so associated with some mothers do have him, and he is a good actor, but light. And so anyway, what happened was I happened to have seen one of the Olivier seasons at Granada, where Olivier did a whole series of plays. He brought Robert Wagner from America, and one of them was a wonderful old play called Hindle Wakes, about a mill owner's son who puts a mill girl in the family way, and the family want to buy her off and get rid of her and all that. And the twist is that at the end she says, "But I never wanted to marry him anyway." So it was, it was a very, very successful play in the early 1900s. And I saw Trevor Reed playing the mill owner's son, and I thought he was wonderful. So it was about 2 years later, and I said, I want to see this guy, Trevor Reed. So Trevor came to see me, had a moustache at that time, and I thought, great. And I had to fight Bill Cotton and everybody, and they said, who is Trevor Reed? And so, but, in fairness, they let me cast him. And really, he was so marvellous and idiosyncratic, and he gave it a whole kind of flavour, and, which...
I mean, Shoestring is a show... I mean, I've seen some of them over the years. I've never seen all of them. But I can never forget the one set on the Clifton Suspension Bridge. Having driven over that many years ago, it scared me just driving over it, trying to shoot a film on it. I just thought, I bet the unions and the health and safety people loved you, didn't they?
They didn't
really?
in those days. No, they do now. Health and safety now wouldn't let you unwrap a sweetie, in case you sprained your wrist. No, the suspension bridge. Actually, we lived up on the Avon Gorge. There was an old crumbling hotel called the Avon Gorge Hotel, strangely. And we overlooked the bridge and we used it. It was always in the back of shot. And then there was one day in the second series, somebody in my unit came to see me. He said, "Oh, we met an American on Saturday." And I said, "Oh, I wasn't." What? And he said, "Yeah, he said, 'Are you guys doing Shoestring?' And they said, 'Yeah.' And he said, 'I love your show. I have it recorded and sent to me.' Cary Grant, who lived in Bristol and was known as Archie Leach, and his mother was still alive at that time, and he used to come back and he used to rent a suite in the Avon Gorge Hotel, and that was him. And I was just sorry I wasn't there to say hello. But
Always the way sometimes.
we exploited a lot of Clifton particularly, but also one of the reasons for doing Shoestring in Bristol was, again, Bill Cotton wanted me to do it in Slough. And I said, come on. You see, because this, you see, in a way, it's a curious link to a lot of thinking today, which is that, everybody, they want to just do it within the environs of London. The city of London, somewhere. It's not, there's no positive thing, even like Amsterdam. And I said, no, I really want to get out of London. I want to get out of here and exploit everything, the Severn, Wales, Bath. And in the end, I won, and it made all the difference. You were saying about the advantage of a film series. That's why it looks so good.
Yes,
It
it
did.
does. But what I like about, I suppose, the shows you have worked on is that you do use the locations you go to. Not I mean, nowadays they'd be used for what I call picturesque shots, but you actually build them into the action.
I always
don't you?
insisted on...
Things actually happen in them.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point in going to a good location and not actually exploiting it? And there are ways of exploiting it without it being picture postcard. I mean, I saw a film the other day. I've seen a lot of French films because I've lived in Paris. And I saw a thing called 36 Quai des Orfèvres, excuse my accent. Wonderful, with Gérard Depardieu and Daniel Auteuil. And it's all set in a kind of Paris that you don't really know, and it's warehouses and rainy banks of the Thames, of the Seine rather, further away from the centre of Paris.
Yeah.
And God, it's good. I mean, it's so brilliant. And a lot of directors would come to Jersey, and they would want to shoot picture postcard, And I said, no. I said, give me the picture postcard in the background. And that was always my intention with everything. And it's indeed with The Darling Buds of May. I can remember saying to the first director on that, think of it as a movie. Don't think of it as a television thing at all.
Yeah.
If you want a crane and you want to do a crane shot, tell me. And I think that's the fun of it, really. That is to actually. That's one of the things I think is missing in British television, where American movies, every now and then they do a movie that is the kind of thing that should be done as a British should be done as a television play in Britain.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen so many good small budget American movies, and we don't make those anymore. No. I mean, anybody worth their salt goes and sees small budget. I mean, even the Jack Nicholsons are not huge budget. They're just very good.
I'm intrigued now. You'll have to tell me about this Catherine Zeta-Jones fairy story, because I'm intrigued by this now.
Well, I mean, it was simply this, that we had to cast the part of Mariette. David Jason came with the package, and brilliant he was. I mean, he's a genius. No question about it. He's brilliant. I don't know about his age in Touch of Frost, but I think he makes the show. But anyway, David came with the package and nobody else. So Pam Ferris, I had met her 2 or 3 years earlier. She did a Central series out of Nottingham called about the rag trade.
Connie,
that's right. And my then partner was in it, an actress. She was in an episode, and they came back on the train one night to St Pancras from Nottingham, and I picked them up, and I gave Pam a run home, and they were screaming with laughter about something, and I always thought, Pam Ferris can laugh, because she'd previously always played very serious things. Her hair was short, and she'd done Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit and all, and she came over as a kind of rather heavy, but I knew that she wasn't. So I put her up for Ma Larkin, and she was actually doing a play in America at the time, and I phoned her, and she screamed, and I said, you're going to be Ma Larkin. Mariette was another thing. We had several actresses in mind, but then I saw a tape, a French mini-series called Scheherazade, in which Catherine Zeta-Jones was there for her beauty, but she'd never made any film. And she was just there riding on camels and whatever, And but then she was talking with an American accent, which she used on stage in 42nd Street. And she was very fluent, and she was actually acting very well, even though she obviously knew she was going to be dubbed, because this was never going to be shown in Britain. And I saw this, and I thought, hey, that's it. And there was one other key factor. The first scene of Darling Buzz is Pop buys a whole lot of ice cream, takes them, puts it to the kids in the back of the lorry, gets in and starts to drive, and then he says, what's wrong with Mariette? She's acting strange today. And Ma says, she's pregnant. And Pop Larkin says, who by? And Ma Larkin says, she doesn't know. And I thought, those lines you've got to be about a girl who's the village beauty and earthy and all that. So that's why we cast her. And she was great, actually. The first 2 years, worked terrific with her. And she nearly got killed in the very first episode, we shot out of sequence, and in the Gymkhana sequence, which was early on, she rode this big black horse, stallion, and we did it in the meadow by the old house with the not the mill, what do you call it? For hops, the hop tower, yeah, the Oast House, and we had all that. We had tents, and we had bands, and we had stalls, and we had everything. And she was then riding in the Gymkhana, and the horse bolted. And it bolted round and round, and everyone was horrified. And stuntmen were trying to leap on it. Everything. I mean, if this had been filmed, what a sequence. And the horse, now the terrible thing was there was these guy ropes everywhere for all these tents. And this was a terrifying thing. And the horse was... Anyway, in the end, the horse tired a bit. She fell off. We sent her straight away to hospital. But she hadn't broken anything. She was perfectly all right. She didn't get back on a horse. She sat on a ladder when she was presented with the rosette for winning the Gymkhana. She was up on this ladder, and...
I'm not surprised.
Talking of the ladders, I'll just tell you a little. I did a series which is not mentioned here. I was the associate producer and story editor. Great experience. You said earlier I seem to do things set in foreign countries. Well, this was Australia, and the lead was Ty Harden, former cowboy in the series Bronco.
Was that Riptide?
Yeah, Riptide, yes. And there was Ty, who'd been Bronco and was, great kind of Texan, hey, very much a cowboy and all that. Couldn't ride a horse. He was always on ladders. Even in the Australian outback, allegedly, he was on a ladder. Anyway, yeah, Riptide was a funny experience, but...
Now, I couldn't help noticing, you were telling me that I noticed there was one H.G. Bates book that I don't think you did adapt, but you did write some of your own stories, didn't you, later on?
Yes, I did,
For
yes.
So why was that one book difficult for you to do?
Because they wanted to hold it back. It was
right.
it was the last book in which he has a heart attack. Excuse me. And it's not been made. They were simply holding that book back. So I wrote an original story called A Season of Heavenly Gifts, in where Pop gets these contraband cigarettes and and all that, and then there's a kind of nightclub crook, and so I seem to be a bit, because I've done My Uncle Silas, another H.G. Bates. I wrote most of the scripts for that, with Albert Finney playing the part. Lovely to do. Didn't quite work. Albert is a wonderful actor and a terrific guy, but personally I think it was all a bit too toppy, we might say. But a lot of people liked it. It was, it wasn't...
It wasn't helpful, the fact that the scheduling was...
Yeah, sure. Was Oliver Reed? He was. Oh, no, he was more than in the frame. He was going to play the part. It was a tragedy. I'd written about 4 scripts, and Ollie had read them, and he was all ready to... In fact, he was only about 3-4 weeks away from the shoot, and he was finishing the Gladiator in Malta, and it was a Sunday morning, and he met some English sailors, as you do in Malta, and he finished up boozing with them. He had about 10 rums. Now, what's 10 rums in Malta, on a Sunday? Poor Ollie, and he just... but, I mean, he was always, getting into trouble, Ollie, because one of my sons worked on a show at Channel 4 called After Dark. Need I? I don't even have to tell you, do I? End of story. I mean...
Was that Angus Banks Stewart?
No, that was... Oh, no, that was another. That was Andrew. They've since all dropped the Banks.
Have they?
On the basis that they don't want to be... And I quite agree with that. No, Angus Banks was my youngest son. He went to Australia, became an actor, phoned me up, said, "Guess where I am?" And I said, "Where?" "You're in Sydney." "No," he said, "I'm in the Northern Territory, in the Kakadu National Park, and I'm doubling for Paul Hogan and various other people in Crocodile Dundee." So when anybody's in the water with a, Australian hat, it's my son Angus. And his credit at the end said stand-in or something, Angus,
yes.
Angus Banks Stewart, and people would ring me up. I was amazed, saying, "Is that your son?" He is now a barrister, would you believe? He gave up being an actor. He gave up production in television, and he's now a Crown prosecutor. And I've seen him at work in the courts, right? And it's the full thing with the gown and the wig. I put it to you that, my lord, And
So he's acting
and
still, really, isn't
what?
he?
It's the best performance he's ever given, actually.
Now, just before I throw it open to some questions from the audience, let me
Yes,
show you
good.
this
Please.
little series here.
Please.
We're going to show an episode of this. So we weren't planning to, but at 4:30 in the bar, we're going to show you the first one of this because this is such an oddity of yours. She's brilliant, though. I think it's great fun. That's a very young Dexter Fletcher, isn't it?
What?
That's a very young Dexter Fletcher.
Oh,
Very
is it
young
really?
indeed.
Yes, go on. Yeah, Dukes of Piccadilly.
You did that almost at the same time as Bergerac.
I did. I'll tell you why, because it was meant to be an adult series. I mean, we go back to one of my earlier points about making things with a bit of humour and hopefully style. And I thought that in London there would be the most exclusive detective agency probably in the world, located somewhere around Piccadilly, Jermyn Street. And the people who worked here wouldn't actually, they wouldn't advertise. People would discreetly give people a card, on an aircraft, maybe Ronnie Reagan would slip somebody a card to have a word with Dukes of Piccadilly. So I created this series. Already I think it was a point at which it was becoming difficult to kind of push an idea that was not police, doctors, lawyers, all that stuff. And so it didn't get made. And then a girl I knew, who was a children's producer there, rang me up and she said, "Whatever happened to Dukes of Piccadilly?" And I said, "Well,
Yeah,
nothing,
Ruth Boswell.
nothing happened." And Ruth Boswell, nothing happened to Dukes of Piccadilly. And she said, "Could I have a look at the thing?" I said, "Okay." And I thought, I don't know. And but anyway, I gave it to her. And she rang me up and said, "Oh, it's lovely. I can do a 6-part series here." And in the end, she got Nigel Hawthorne, who was wonderful. He was actually, it's a series of which I was really very proud. I didn't write it all. I just created it, wrote the first
Yeah,
two,
Bob
I think.
Holmes wrote it before, didn't he?
Bob wrote it, and Bob Baker, who was also a story editor of mine on Shoestring. It became it wasn't very well done, to be honest. But Nigel Hawthorne was great. It's one of his unsung performances.
Yeah, I
by
think
the
it's a
way.
fantastic little series, and no one's ever heard of it before. I think
And you
Simon
know,
told me about it
I
originally.
wish to
didn't
God
you?
Thames would put it out on DVD.
Yeah.
And I could get a few more bucks. Because it's a nice series. It probably sell quite well.
Yes, it's great.
Everything's on DVD now.
It's getting there.
Everything.
Let's have some questions from the audience. I'm sure a few people have got a few more before I can. Anyone to ask Bob anything? Go on.
Yes?
I arrived a bit late, so you might have mentioned it and I might have missed it, but Moon and Sun,
Yes.
I remember really well, and I'd love to see it again.
Well,
Anything you want to say about that?
I was very disappointed. There was a history to that, which is actually known. I wanted, what's her name? The Australian actress who was married to Sean Connery. Diane Chalento. I wanted Diane Chalento to play Gladys Moon. And I was all set up to have her when Jonathan Powell, who was then controller of BBC One, suddenly said, "Oh, I don't want you to cast her," And I said, I never found out why. And so I was blown off course. And then I made a terrible mistake. I cast another actress. We're getting back to the Avengers here, except it wasn't me then. But I did cast an actress, and we made a pilot episode in France. And she wasn't right. And it was my fault. It was entirely my fault. So we had about 3 or 4 days to go again. And Millicent Martin was here, and I think Millie made a terrific stab at it. But I don't know. Firstly, it went out on a Saturday night, and it was totally inappropriate for Saturday night. It was, it was too light. It wasn't a real thriller series. It was a bit of comedy as well. I mean, a clairvoyant lady running her own sort of emporium with no talent for reading anybody's fortune, but her son had all the talent. And I thought it could work. Didn't work all that well. Not everything is successful.
I always thought that the weight of expectation was too high as well, because, I mean, having done the Shoestring and
Oh.
Bergerac and Lovejoy, everyone said, this is the next great Bob Banks Stewart series. And the press built it up, didn't they?
Terrible.
And you were expecting something and nothing could ever live up to that.
I tell you what, I have still got in a file. The press came over to France, where we shot half of it in northern France, half in south of England, in the markets, you see. And the BBC organised a press visit, and about a dozen people came over. And, they loved being over, and it was all lovely. And then 2 things happened. There were articles in the Express, the Mail, the Sun, and they were terrific, it's terrible. I was described as the man with the Midas touch, right?
That's always fatal.
Yeah, fatal. TV guru and all this sort of thing. Pictures of me sitting, and my colleagues at the BBC were going, And sure enough, when the series didn't last more than one series, it felt that it had the curse on it of being. The other thing was I was indiscreet about something to do with Darling Buzz. So another newspaper, The Star, ran a story which embarrassed me greatly, where I appeared to rip off a few people involved with it, which wasn't really the case.
I always thought the other problem with Moon and Sun, which wasn't your fault, is that I think generally, every time we speak to the British, remember Agincourt, generally I don't think the British and French really get on in many
somebody
ways.
Said the British
there's quite a lot of anti-French feeling in Britain.
Somebody said the British don't give a pomfret for stories set in France. That was one of the reactions. I don't know. I think if it's properly done, it can work. I would. Well, listen. As I say, you don't win them all, and
No.
There are series that I've been associated with. I don't think many, but some that I wouldn't.
Okay, any more questions?
Just curious.
Yes.
You said you worked with John Cruise on creating the Human Jungle.
Yes, I did. Yes.
How did the actual mechanics of that work with the 2 writers working together?
Fine. Walked in the woods in Surrey and kicked it around. Say, hey, wait a minute. He's Harley Street. Yes, right. Must be psychiatrist in Harley Street. But that's not all. He works for a hospital as well. And then we decided, because some friends of mine, again, from personal experience, some friends of mine owned a spread in Kent, and they grew Christmas trees for Christmas, as a business. And I said, well, why doesn't he have a farm in Kent and he grows Christmas trees? And so, gradually kind of built up. But of course, as I said earlier, it just began with the Human Jungle psychiatrist, full stop.
Would one of you just then do the main draft, or would you?
I don't know. No, we just scratched down a thing. Richard Harris and I did work on a movie version of Shoestring. What we did then, it never got made, by the way, because the Ranks were the people who were going to make it, and just at that moment they withdrew all their finance from movies, so it didn't get made, which is rather a pity. But what Richard and I did was we went to Devon and we played golf every day, which we did anyway, and we just chucked things around while we were playing. And then in the evening, we'd kind of finesse what we'd talked about And then he would write a couple of scenes, and I would write a couple of scenes. Then I'd give him the two that I'd written, and he'd give me the two he'd written. And that way we got the screenplay.
I'm quite intrigued. Would that have been set in Bristol still, or were they going to expand it to an
It was
international
set in
theme?
Bristol, and Shoestring met a lovely lady who was buying antique lace. She was an American lady, and she was buying antique lace around the West Country, but she was actually a private eye like him. And the story, I won't bore you with the story, but it led back to Los Angeles, and we were going to shoot in California, and we had in it. I don't think it's been done. We had a chase sequence with two Rolls Royces chasing each other with bullet holes in them, which I thought might be fun. I had a Rolls Royce once, back in the 60s, and the reason I mentioned that is I got when I sold it, I got a letter from a guy in Hollywood saying, "Dear Mr. Banks Stewart, I'm now the proud owner, of your Rolls Royce, and if you're ever over here." I never actually looked this guy up. Pity, because he might have been a big money man. He might have got money.
I keep asking my wife for a Rolls Royce, and I might get the Airfix toy one.
Listen,
day,
don't kid yourself about Rolls Royces. I loved having it, but at 12 miles to the gallon, no. And then they brought in parking meters. Don't forget, it's the early 60s. And I was running down, feeding a meter at 8 o'clock in the morning with a Rolls Royce, ridiculous. But it was fun. They had an electric window, so we could put the kids in the back and press the button in the window. Oop, the window went up and they could make a noise in the back. And when I would go through Spanish villages, I used to take it to the continent, go through Spanish villages, and people would shout, a more unlikely looking bullfighter than me, but maybe I was wearing a hat or something, and people would shout, "Ole!" Because all the bullfighters in Spain had Rolls Royces, like footballers today, Except footballers don't have Rolls Royces. You can buy a Rolls Royce for $4,000. Nobody wants them, really. Sorry if I'm insulting anybody here.
No, I've never met
You
someone
don't
with a
have a
Rolls
Rolls
Royce
Royce,
before. I'm very impressed, actually.
Sorry?
Would it be in the same cast or different people?
Same cast.
For the movie of Shoestring.
Oh, the movie. Oh,
You
yes.
keep
Yeah.
Trevor Reed.
Well, Shoestring and Doran Godwin, who played Erica, would have been in the film. But we would have had 2 or 3 stars. The American lady lace buyer could be any, one of a number of stars. That was the idea. Beryl Virtue was going to be the producer because it was actually Stigwoods who were going to do it. And they got the money from Rags.
Yeah.
So the script lies today rotting on a shelf in my study. And I thought it was a good one.
One day, one day.
What?
Might come back one day.
Well, Trevor Reeve has often said that he would like to do it again, but I think it's a little bit of it's a doubtful.
It's always very fatal to try and revisit the past too much because people always
It
misremember
is.
sometimes.
But
what
I
the
will
past
tell
is,
you something. There is a lot of interest. I won't put it higher than that. I've recreated Bergerac. Now you may well ask, how can I do that? John, who's one of my best friends, he's very demonstrably, in his 60s. He's filled out. How can he go back to being Bergerac? Well, he had a daughter. His daughter is now 28 years old, and she's a detective sergeant in Jersey. And Bergerac himself is retired. He's got a grey beard, salt and pepper hair, and he's working in a boatyard. He's running a boatyard. And it's called Bergerac because it is Bergerac. So, stay tuned.
Are they interested in making it then?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well,
A
there you go.
company not a million miles away from here, actually.
So you heard it first here. You see, you should definitely.
Well,
come to
I
our
only
next
say
one.
it because I'm saying it's being considered. It's not. It's
Yeah.
by no means. Charles Allen, who's boss or was boss of ITV, has just been sacked, and there's a lot of flux there. And
Yeah.
So, who knows who will make a decision, if at all, and they might say no. But a lot of people feel, and of course I do, obviously, that it would be terrific to. Not because of the advantage of me getting it, and I wouldn't incidentally produce it. I would
Yeah.
be executive or something. I still think people would love a series set on Jersey, if the stories are good enough.
Go to Guernsey.
Oh,
Georgie and I much prefer Guernsey.
No,
to
I
Jersey.
I
think
agree with you.
Guernsey's great.
I do agree with you about St. Peter Port is far and away more picturesque and much more interesting than St. Helier.
Yeah.
St. Helier, it's been primped up a bit, but it was a dump. And I used to feel so guilty. There was a couple of episodes where we used the hydrofoil from St. Helier to Saint Malo. And then, of course, it was dubbed into French. The whole series, it's still running in France. The French love it. And, as a result of which, tourists began to arrive.
Yes.
And they get off the hydrofoil, on the quayside in St. Helier. And I might actually be on the hydrofoil and I'd think, oh, God, these people are going to arrive here. They're going to find this greasy spoon atmosphere. But it was very embarrassing because you had people in front. Oh, it's a Chelsea, Chelsea, blah, You say, oh God, they're not going to
The
find
Jersey tourist board is still using Bergerac even now.
Oh, of course they do. Yes.
20 years later.
Well, they're madly keen on doing it again because when I started it, I had a problem. I said, it's called Bergerac and it's about a detective sergeant. I can't pretend it's anywhere else but Jersey. Unlike a British police series, you can say, you don't even need to say where you are. But if you're going to shoot in Jersey, it's demonstrably Jersey. So I came up with the idea of the Bureau des Étrangers. I said, look, here's a bureau, part of the thing. They deal with cases, tax avoiders, millionaires, tourists, Portuguese hotel workers, all that. The Bureau des Étrangers. And they said, great, do it, fine. So I got the full cooperation. And of course it was amazing. Their tourism rose by 40%, would you believe? It was worth 40%. Wish I'd had a piece of it. I'd have a house in Jersey as well. But anyway, the thing is that solved the problem to a point where when the Jersey police used to go to conferences on the mainland, their police colleagues would say, oh yeah, here come the Bureau des Étrangers, which didn't exist.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Fantastic. Any more questions? Go on.
Question on Lovejoy.
Yes.
Were you responsible for the absolutely perfect casting?
No.
And was your decision as producer to change it away from the books? Because
Yes.
characters need to...
Yes, I did make that decision. I didn't cast Ian McShane. The history of that was that McShane was living in, as he does even now, very successfully. He's doing Deadwood, which nobody in Britain will ever see except if they take Sky. And in any case, they never use it. Has anybody here watched Deadwood? They're on the last series, yeah. Well, Ian never stops effing and blinding, doesn't he? I mean every...
12
It's extraordinary. But it's because it's an HBO subscription show in America, they can do that. They never show it on a network. And they never show it on a network here. McShane was doing a play in Hollywood, Inadmissible Evidence. And a woman he'd never met came round to his dressing room and she had a book, Lovejoy. And she said, Ian, why don't you look at that and read it, because that's a series. And that's how it happened. Ian went to see his friends, Ian Lafreniere and Dick Clement, who live in Los Angeles, gave them the book. Dick Clement didn't work on it, but Ian Lafreniere wrote 2 episodes, which were called the Venetian Pair, which became the last 2. But he wrote them rather James Bondish, and that really wasn't right. And the BBC said, we love the idea of doing it, we love the idea of McShane playing Lovejoy, but we need to give it a new approach. So I was asked to do it, and we had a team of writers as well as Ian Lafreniere. Of course, it was always set in Suffolk, and it was fun. I have to say, the guy who wrote the books was a very charming guy, Jonathan Gash. That's his pseudonym. I can't remember his name, Scottish doctor of tropical medicine. He wrote with great knowledge of antiques and everything, but his books are not anything like the series. I think you know that, don't you?
Very seedy characters in the books.
The what?
Very seedy.
Yes, and not very confused and labyrinthine and so on. So we had to try and find a way of doing it, in a more general sense. The rest of the cast were my suggestions. Phyllis Logan had worked with me before. When I suggested her, Ian Lafreniere and Alan McEwen, who was the producer or executive producer for Wits End, which was McShane's company, they'd never heard of her. And I said, oh, she's a terrific actress. And she came in and did a little scene for them. And they said, oh, perfect. Similarly, Dudley Sutton. I mean, Dudley was marvellous, except that when the first episode was done, he came over totally Colonel Blimp, which he got eventually, as the series wore on, he became even more sort of Colonel Blimp. But I remember I got him in and I said, Dudley, he and his agent came in and I said, look, it's just too blimpish and he pulled it back and he was good. And the young guy, as he was then, who played Eric, he was a very fine young actor. He's now a director, actually, Chris Drury. It all kind of worked. It was, and I have to say this. I mean, Ian McShane brought a lot of fun to it. I mean, he's not everybody's cup of tea, I have to say, and that's true in real life. I won't go into that, but he did have a lot of style, and and it didn't make
It
it.
looks like David Dickinson.
The what?
It looks like David Dickinson, the outtake expert.
Well, I think I put it the other way. David Dickinson looks like Ian McShane,
Come on then, Simon. Let's have your question as well. Then, sorry, I'm trying to ignore it. I'm conscious time's running out on us.
Yes.
That's all. So.
Hopefully it's going to be fairly quick. I just really wanted to ask a question similar to one I did a bit earlier, but this time about Call Me Mister, which you haven't mentioned.
Oh,
Yes.
yes,
Which
yes.
I really liked.
Yes.
Thank you. Not a lot of people know that.
It was a great series. I like Cormister as well.
Well, yeah, I because my wife was Australian, my ex-wife. My three sons are they're joint nationality, and because I had worked in Australia for a year, I was very determined to make a series. Again, the fun of doing it abroad. Steve Bisley, who played the part, I saw him on stage in Sydney, and I thought he was a terrific actor. And he didn't quite. He was a bit. He's called Grizzly Bisley in the end. He I don't know. People used to say to me he wasn't romantic enough to play a lead, but I've never actually subscribed to that idea. I've always thought a good actor makes his mark, with everybody. It was fun to do as a series, and we were actually going to switch it after the first series. David, what's his name, the actor who played in a wheelchair, David Bamber, very fine actor at the National and everything. David was going to go to Sydney because Jack Bartholomew was going to go back to Sydney, and they were going to start their detective agency in Sydney. So I was looking forward to a whole series, a new series in Sydney, but it didn't happen. Michael Grade very kindly offered to buy it from ABC, but he wasn't prepared to put up the money to make it. And they made a very inferior series subsequently in Melbourne. Was that what it was called? Yes. No, that was a period piece, wasn't it?
No, there was a series called Boys in the Bush.
Was that
a couple of years later?
Yeah, that was
made by Cinema Verity.
Yeah, didn't work. But
No, it didn't.
Call Me Mister, sadly, only ran one series. That again.
Well, it's one of Simon's favourite shows. This is very true. I can testify.
I hope
to
you've got
this.
a nice. I don't think it's been put out on video. There are people you see. It's curious. People in the BBC, if they've read bad reviews, they don't.
It's quite true.
I just find it strange.
Right, well, we're going to call a halt there
Yeah,
and have some
fine.
afternoon tea because it's high time that Robert and I had something to eat and drink. And the Arm and I have brought along some cakes. And Chris Fontaine somewhere. Going to wave at us, Chris, wherever you are. He's going to sort that out for us because Sue's down in Tenby on holiday this time. She is. So we'll have something to eat and drink. Robert, thank you very much indeed for being very entertaining. That
Well,
was brilliant.
thank you.
I'm sure people will carry on asking you questions out in the bar because there's lots more to know. I want to see the Shoestring script for the film. I'm really intrigued by this. That sounds fascinating. That does.
Well, maybe it'll
You
get
know,
made someday.
brilliant. Yeah, that'd be really good.
I'll have to change. I'll have to change the name.
String ship.
Yeah, well, he was called Bootlace by many
Right.
people.
Go on. Let's clap then. Thank you.
Thank you. What?